Hello, everyone. Welcome to this interim meeting of the CBOR working group. You're all aware of the note well that guides those things. One change since last time we've met, those who arrived a few minutes before already noticed, or who read the mailing list. We have Paul now with us as working group chair. Thanks, Paul, for helping in here. This should allow us to get a lot of the things that we're working on unstuck. We have one item that we'd like to focus on of the three that we all know, CDE, ED Literals, and PACT. That is the that has the highest priority in terms of getting resolved. That is CDE. Current status is that there is still open discussions ongoing. Barry, Paul, do you want to chime in on those before we go into the meat of those?
I'll chime in and again, to say the same thing I said to Carson just before the meeting started. One of the things that Andy, our AD, wanted me to do was to review consensus, because this working group, like many IETF working groups, will adopt a document, and the document will change during working group discussion. And however, the way the IETF is supposed to work is that the working group adopts an idea, and a document embodies that idea, and that there is consensus all the way along that we're still on that idea. Anyone who's been following the mailing list about CDE knows that the idea of determinism and serialization and such was initially embodied in the CDE 00 draft, but has moved greatly since then. And I'm taking notes as I'm going through and following threads and such like that. But Barry and Christian and I sort of informally agreed, let's get CDE done first before we go back and look at the other ones. PACT has been sitting there for years. We're not in a rush to finish it. In my going through the mailing list, looking for discussion of CDE, there's been plenty of PACT discussion, which indicates to me that we in fact do not have strong consensus on where it has gone in the last few years. I haven't been looking. It might be easy to do. For all I know, the changes that Carson just made might actually bring us back into consensus. But the important thing here, and the thing that Andy really wanted me to do, was to make sure that what came out of this working group actually had working group consensus. This is a working group with one very strong author, Karsten, who I co-authored CBOR with, so I understand that. And but we do need to have working group consensus. So that's why I said to Carson just before the meeting, let's not even worry about PACT for now. It seems like the working group has much more energy about determinism, and so let's do that. And we'll certainly try to get to at least an initial thought about PACT before 125, so within the next 5 or 6 months. And again, the fact that it's been sitting there for 3 years means that we're not in a super rush on that. Christian or Barry, have I said anything, since we've barely talked, have I said anything that y'all disagree with?
No.
We're all good.
Okay, great, thanks. And by the way, just to be clear, as I'm looking for consensus, I'm not running meetings and such like that. Christian and Barry will continue to do that. I'm trolling through the mailing list and trying to find, is this related to that and such like that. Meetings will continue as normal. Thanks.
Thank you, Paul. From what has been filed in the data tracker, we have two people who want to present their their view on the state of CDE. As with the last time, if there are no good reasons not to do so, I'd go with them in the order in which they were filed, which may also serve as an incentive for people to file slides a bit early so that everyone can review them. Lawrence, do you want to start?
Yes, I can start.
Slide control should be with you now.
Let's see. Yeah, okay. Okay, so before my presentation is about my CBOR serialization draft, which I have recently made a major update to. Before I jump into that, I want to be explicit at this point that I oppose publication of draft CBOR CDE in its current form. I fully oppose the publication of that. The 2-3 reasons for that are I think that what we publish should be about serialization, not sort of starting out with determinism. It should be a general thing about serialization, and I think the structure of the document is kind of inverted and convoluted, and there's some other things. And I've said this in comments on the mailing list a number of times. The second major category reason I oppose it is I think it is not very clear. I think it's about twice as long as it should be. And some of the way the wording is constructed, I find it very difficult to read. And I think that the point of this is to increase clarity, and I don't think it's achieving that. Third is that I have been commenting on this in grand detail, very thoughtfully, very carefully for over a year now, and there's been no progress or any uptake of any significance of my comments on these in the last year in the CDE draft. So just be clear about that stuff I've said to some degree before, but I want to be very explicit. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about my serialization draft and what I've done with the update here. And so the aim here is to clarify all of CBOR serialization and determinism, all of it. I've been casting about, trying to find a way to do this full clarification, and that's the purpose of the draft. I'm actually open to a lot of different ways of approaching it, and this update is, in a way, another way of approaching it. Trying different things to see what will go. So to that aim, the definitions are short to the point. Use 2119 language. All the long background explanations, which are really valuable and really important, especially in this, because we've learned a lot in the last few years talking about this. But I put it all in the appendices so that it doesn't obscure the straightforward to the point definitions. This document defines 3 serializations. I'm not super attached to the names, but they needed names, so that's why I have the names here. So general serialization is the name given to the full set of options. Sometimes this is just called, I think Carson's called it CBOR. I think it's called not well-formed, but it's all of the serialization options. Ordinary serialization, which is intended to be basically a replacement for preferred, and deterministic serialization, which is equivalent to what's in 4.2.1 of 8949, or also what we know as CDE. I'm aiming for clarity by defining 2 new serializations rather than trying to do an update or normatively reference the old ones. I'm hoping that is something that works for clarity. Giving it a try here. So, and then as I said, I'm happy to consider alternative names for these. So what's full serialization? I'm going to go through basically these three things that what it's defined, and in a little bit of detail the three named serializations. So general serialization is the full set of options. There's a little bit of a problem with the terminology here, and we've discussed that with Karsten on the list, but I think he calls them encoding constraints. I mean, general serialization has no encoding constraints. So any length of CBOR argument is okay. So the integers can be encoded as 0x00, 0x1, 00, and so on. You know, that's CBOR argument is for array lengths and tags and all of that. So any length floating point values, regardless of value. So you can encode 0 as a half, single or double. Both definite and indefinite lengths are allowed. And then big numbers are independent of integers. Through the discussion, we note that this is actually what is expected when a protocol like CWT or COSE don't specify serialization. And then this also requires what we've been calling touch not the nans. I'm going to take questions at the end on this. I want to finish this because I feel any question is going to go quite long, possibly. So, so touch not the nans is, you know, where the length of the nan is preserved, so you don't have to do any preferred serial any changes to the nan. Okay, so ordinary serialization is intended as a replacement for preferred serialization going forward. This is not deprecating preferred. This is a new serialization, just called ordinary serialization. So if you're using preferred, it doesn't change it. You can still use preferred and all that. It's the same, except that only quiet nan is allowed, like CBOR, and definite lengths are a requirement, not a preference. So this is the same as definite length only that Karsten has proposed, except for the whole thing about the nans. It's, I believe, largely interoperable with what has been implemented for preferred serialization. So most people could just take and rebrand their preferred implementation. I think most people assumed in preferred that indefinite lengths were a requirement. I think non-trivial nans are not widely used, so even and we're not widely uniformly supported. So I'm kind of sort of skipping over that or allowing the variation there because I don't think it's of consequence. Deterministic serialization. I like this name. It inherits everything from ordinary serialization, and then the only thing it does is adds map sorting. This, to me, is pretty much what's going on in 4.2.1 and CDE. The difference is that it only allows quiet nan. And again, I believe largely interoperable with what has been implemented for 4.2.1 and CDE. And that's it for my slides. So let's do discussion and questions now. I'll let the chairs moderate that.
Paul, you're in the queue.
Yeah, so thank you. One of the things that I am hitting as I go through the year's worth of discussion on this is how, or the not discussion of this draft because it's more recent, but of CDE, is how many of these require, or I'm sorry, not how many, which of these specifications are based on needs of protocols versus the idea that some interpreters, and I use that term purposely incorrectly so that I'm not, you know, like picking a term that has a subterm. how many interpreters are going to want to be smaller and therefore not deal with certain things. And like, for example, can you say this one here is for smaller interpreters, but this one is because people want to be able to do non-binary comparisons? Does that make sense?
I can answer that to some degree.
Well, I mean, I'm only asking you to answer it for your draft.
Well, I mean, general serialization lets you pick and choose what you want. Well, implementing all of general serialization is the largest thing. If you really, really want something small, you need to pick and choose and do a specialized serialization. Preferred serialization is actually pretty reasonable and pretty small, particularly by excluding indefinite lengths. And
when you say small, are you saying that for the interpreter or for the protocol that needs to think about what is it seeing?
Mostly the encoder and the decoder. And I'm going to have
thank you.
Large experience on this, having implemented this very carefully. And the only reason that there's a difference between deterministic serialization and preferred serialization is because map sorting adds a lot of code and is complicated and expensive in some environments. Not a modern laptop, but in a really small device.
Great, thanks.
Carsten?
Thank you. I have a clarification question to, what was it, slide 2 or 3, where you say that we reference section 3 of RFC 8949. No, the previous one or the next one. Yeah, the touch not the nonce thing. Can you tell me where in section 3 of 8949 it says that?
I believe it is implied in section 3. I don't think it is said explicitly in section 3.
Mm-hmm. So maybe we should spend some time offline to dig out where the text implies that, because I'm not aware of that.
Okay. I mean, so, let me ask this question. I was thinking about this morning. In the generic CBOR data model, is not preferred is a half precision distinct from a single precision distinct from a double precision float?
No. And that was actually something that you initiated in 2018. So at some point we decided to say floating point values are just very similar to integer values, and we just always use the shortest head that represents them, and put all the other representations that are longer than that in the same equivalence class. So they have this same meaning in the data model.
That, and again, we need to figure out where it says that. I mean, I think that we should take that to the mailing list, because I think that's a key thing.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty fundamental thing that of course we can change, and we can change everything, but it will be CBOR 2.0 we are building then. So I really wanted to say something, and Paul asked the question for that. So what are the parties to this game? And there are 3 parties that we really need to separate in our heads, even though sometimes they are implemented together. One is the CBOR protocol, the application protocol, that makes certain determinations about what the data are that are being interchanged. And traditionally, we have tried to separate the data model that the protocol defines from the serialization. So any serialization constraints or encoding constraints that the CBOR protocol makes try to be orthogonal to the data model. And I think that that's a pretty important invariant that we haven't talked about much. The other two players are the encoder and the decoder. And so the encoder takes the application representation of the data model level information and generates an encoded data item. And the decoder takes an encoded data item and puts this back into the data model form that works on the other platform. So that's the definition. And one invariant we had so far was that any serialization can be decoded by something we called a generic decoder in RFC 8949. So I think that's one thing we need to keep in mind. A decoder needs to be able to decode any CBOR, at least if it has everything implemented to do that. Of course, you can do partial implementations, and we want to do partial implementations here. We want to support them. There is no additional channel that tells you what the sender of an encoded data item intended to use as a serialization. Now, the context of the protocol may provide that channel. For instance, a media type definition could say, oh, byte strings that are used as encodings, as representations in a media type are supposed to be common deterministic encoding. But that should not be something that the decoder needs to know to actually decode the data. And we have a number of these invariants, and I think it would be very useful to actually state these invariants. They can go into another appendix. That's not a problem, but we need to understand what we're trying to achieve here. And the important thing, of course, is that you can write a library that does CBOR decoding, and that library just works on every piece of CBOR. And I think that would be a good thing. Jason has that, and I think we should have it as well. And that means we cannot really make any decoding decisions based on the intent of the encoder, what serialization was supposed to be used. And that has a number of small but important consequences. These are all corner cases, but I think it's important to do that. Joe?
Yeah, can you say that last part again? I don't think I fully understood it, and it felt like it was important.
Yeah, the idea is that a CBOR can be decoded by a generic CBOR decoder. And it doesn't matter what the serialization intent of the encoder was. It's always CBOR. There's only one CBOR that can be decoded. Now, what is the part that I need to maybe explain more?
So I can hop in here because, and to answer your last question, Karsten, which is what is the part you need to describe better? In my first question to Lawrence, the answer I got was that some of the reasons why we're defining these things is for what you're calling applications, and some of them is for the implementers of the decoders. And your description in the last couple of minutes, Karsten, absolutely mixed up decoders and generic decoders. And I believe from what I've been seeing on the list, that there's a difference in belief in two things. One is that there might be a good reason for a decoder not to be a generic decoder. And I'm teasing this out. I have not seen it directly on the list, but I think one of the reasons that an application, someone who's writing a decoder to an application might want a non-generic decoder is so that it fails immediately when seeing something that is not in what the application defined. So I think we need to do much more than what you and I did in 8949 on talking about non-generic decoders with respect to these serializations. But the other thing is that you said that I think I'm sure I have seen on the list is you're like, oh, well, a decoder can't tell what it's decoding, what the intent was. And that's not true. There could be a tag somewhere in there saying this is for that. And at that point, the decoder is expected to not only decode, but to enforce restrictions. And which, of course, a generic decoder won't. Lawrence, does that sound like I have said things either that's in your document or what you've been saying on the list, or Joe, for that matter?
Actually, I think well, let me back up a little bit and say a couple things here. So the reason you implement determinism, you choose determinism, is if your protocol needs determinism. And some protocols absolutely need it. I mean, there's a part of COSE that absolutely needs it. You could also choose it if you like it because it's deterministic. A lot of people like it, so. But that's why you choose determinism. You choose ordinary serialization or preferred serialization. I believe the primary reason for that is if you want interoperability and you don't want to implement indefinite length decoding, because indefinite length decoding is expensive in some environments. So that's, I believe, the primary reason why you implement that. General serialization would be nice if everybody did it, but it's the largest and the most difficult of all of that. So a lot of people are not going to do that because ordinary serialization or preferred does what they want. Then there's also the class of specialized serialization, which is things like streaming. And that is something that I've run a thread on in the mailing list, but it is not in any document anywhere. As far as I know, there's no discussion of specialized serializations, like something that just does streaming or just does, maybe, you could even do a deterministic streaming if you wanted to. But yeah, so that's the answer to that.
Yeah, but that's a different thing from what I pointed out. So decoder may be a partial implementation. So if we want to support partial implementations, then we need to get our encoders to only send stuff that the partial implementation actually can work with. And that's one reason to have an encoding constraint. The other reason is that we want to do deterministic encoding. So I think these are just very different reasons. And I think both reasons are good reasons. And I think it took us a long time to understand that the document needs to say something about partial implementations. And one thing we will have to decide is this going to be 10,000 options that you individually can switch on or off? Or can we maybe find one or two cases of partial implementations that we specifically want to support in an encoder? So the encoder can be guided by the protocol definition to do something that a partial implementation can decode. But that's not something that says something about a generic decoder, because a generic decoder can decode everything. So these are just two different things.
Okay.
I think I'm next. Yeah, I think it's clear that generic decoders should be able to decode anything. I think that's definitionally what they are. That makes sense to me. Or general decoder. Like if we're going to use the terms from Lawrence's draft here, general decoders should be able to decode anything. Right. I think the question on partial implementations is more or less, I agree more or less with what Carsten said, with one caveat is that I expect a partial implementation to error if it receives any of the protocols that it doesn't implement. So if it receives indefinite length encoding, it should error because it doesn't know how to continue. Maybe it errors in a way that you can capture the things that have happened up to that point and do some, you've got a partial result, but I would expect it to stop decoding that stream because recoverability is not likely to be useful. It's frankly easier to just implement indefinite correctly than it would be to recover from an indefinite and skip that data. So I don't understand, though, why this distinction. It sounded like Carsten was disagreeing with what you were saying with what he was saying. And I see instead what he was saying embedded in Lawrence's draft very nicely. Maybe we could use different words, in which case, hey, great, that's easy to fix. Like if we agree on the concept of there is such a thing as a reduced implementation, the two places where reducing implementation size are interesting that we know of so far are indefinite length encodings and nans with payloads. I think we can all agree that the original code for doing that where you just cast doesn't work for a variety of reasons. You have to at least take that small chunk of code from one of the drafts in order to do it correctly. We can then argue about whether it's correct or not, or whether it's implemented adequately, interoperably in any place that matters. But it is at least some code to add. So it is a simplification not to have to do that and to just fire an error when you receive something you don't know how to decode.
Mm-hmm.
Lawrence, does that make sense to you?
Yes.
All right.
So I'm going to hop in wearing my chair hat again, or actually more accurately, I've been rereading the mailing list, which you all probably haven't, hat, which I'm only wearing because Andy made me chair. I believe that you are missing with something, Lawrence, that you had said earlier, and definitely something Joe just said that we are missing, which is that a generic decoder can, in fact, also know about some restrictions and enforce restrictions. That's additional code for a generic decoder. If it says, I know that this thing is supposed to have this serialization, and look, it's outside of that, I need to look for that and reject it. Similarly, a restricted encoder, a restricted decoder. And again, I'm getting this from various things that were said on the list that were taken up and sort of dropped. But a restricted decoder has to be able to error not just with the I don't know how to decode this, but to say this is outside of what I have been told to decode. I don't know whether a application will require that, but from something that someone said like a year and a half ago, that does seem like that there will be applications that will want that. So this adds complexity, but not to this adds complexity to what might be implemented, but not to the kinds of serialization. And I think that where, at least, and again, I haven't finished going through and looking at my notes again and trying to organize, but I think one place where I'm seeing a strong lack of consensus in the CDE discussion, which this draft does definitely address, is where and how a restricted decoder implements its restrictions, if that helps.
Yeah, I'd like to quick answer on that. I mean, I think there's, as Carsten said, there's a checking decoder, and you can do a checking decoder that checks to be sure everything conforms to deterministic serialization or to CBOR or to ordinary serialization. And in that case, it's going to return some sort of an error like a check failed such that, different from the configuration. There's the other kind of restricted decoder, which is like, I just didn't implement indefinite lengths because I don't have room in my in my device to support indefinite lengths. In that case, it's probably going to return unsupported.
Yes, I fully agree. But again, from what I'm seeing on the list where people are making assumptions of one way or another, I think that distinction needs to be listed in the document and not assumed. It certainly was not well described in 8949. And since we are extending 8949 with new ideas, that new idea needs to be captured, and if not, I think we're going to hit again another lack of consensus later on about you didn't capture this idea, which is important to me for this application.
Yeah, good point. Carsten, you're in the queue. I don't know if you're just.
Yeah, thank you. There are several things that came up here. So just to make clear that my point is that a generic decoder is not a transforming decoder. It's not something that takes the CBOR and gives you something different. It's really trying to decode what's in the CBOR data stream and giving you the data model for that, data model level information for that. And that's a pretty interesting statement. We probably need to work a little bit more on that. But I was intrigued by what Paul just said, that we are extending 8949, and I'm not entirely sure that we all agree that this is what we are trying to do here. So I have occasionally said that it would be good to have a PCP here that really documents the existing practice and yes, fills some gaps in how the existing practice is using things to get back to the invariance. But I hope we are not in an extension spree here.
I will fully disagree. Any new definition, any new terms we define are an extension, period.
Joe?
So after all the discussion, having read the draft, I do like the way that this draft lays out. I like the simplicity of it. One of the things I've always liked about the CBOR draft is how clear it is for implementers to know exactly what they need to do, without a lot of extra explanations that I had to wade through. So I like the way that Lawrence's draft is setting up. I think I could get behind with some small tweaks of things where neither one of us cares that much about which names things have, etc. I'd be getting behind publishing this very quickly. So I appreciate the work and think that this is very useful. So thank you, Lawrence.
Thanks.
Any further comments or questions on this document or on Lawrence's presentation? Hearing none, thanks Lawrence and all of you for the good discussion. And I'll hand slide control over to Carsten, who has prepared a few things as well. should be with you now. Carsten, please go ahead.
Okay, so I was hoping we could do packed and EDN literal first. I'm not going to say anything about CDE because I think what I need to say needs to be said on the mailing list. It's a little bit more complicated. So I really would like to talk about packed and EDN literal for a moment.
Is there anything anyone else wants to bring up on CDE? If not, I'm fine with this.
Joe is in the queue? Okay. Good. So I essentially just wanted to point out there is a revision 17 out that of packed that is addressing the issues that we had in GitHub. There may be lots of issues out there that the authors are not aware of, but the issues in the GitHub are addressed. And from the view of the authors, we are done. So we could do a second working group last call now. And I really would like to avoid head of line blocking here because there really is no point in doing that. I think the people who actually work on packed are largely different people who work on CDE, so I don't think that causes any delay at all. So this is my point here, and I am asking the chairs to ponder that.
The chairs will have to discuss this offline and get back to you. The
Yes.
problem with doing that could be that it just distracts the mailing list, the working group in general, from working on CDE for the time that they're discussing this. So let's have the chairs go off and talk about it, and we'll get back to the working group on it.
Yeah, that's an important observation. We have a lot of distractions on the mailing list, and it's really hard to follow what's going on. So maybe addressing the distractions in the more general way would also be a good thing to do.
Okay.
Okay, so that was all I wanted to say about packed at this point. The other thing I quickly wanted to point out is that EDN literals is actually the one that is head of line blocking a lot of other specs outside this working group. So it's probably the one draft that has the largest urgency for people doing work in the IETF with CBOR outside the working group. Joe, you want to say something directly to this?
Yeah, I think actually, Carsten, it may be useful for you and I to go offline and do a quick discussion about EDN literal, because I think the places where we disagree on that I remember are places where we can get to agreement quickly, just about implementation details and how they fit into the draft. And so I'm willing to do that at your convenience, and I think we can make good progress on that.
Are you going to be in Montreal?
I'm not, unfortunately.
Okay.
That would have been ideal, but we could do it over the phone at some point.
Yeah. Okay. So I think that's a very good thing. Francesca started some activity to get this kind of offline discussion going, but she's unavailable at the moment. So maybe we can just work together on this. I just wanted to point out one thing where it would be nice if people thought about that. In the last time we really discussed this in an interim, we came up with something called raw strings to solve the problem that the way EDN literals works sometimes can require you to do nested escaping, which is always a big problem. So raw strings would have been a way to solve that. I'm not going to show all these slides here. If something is sepia colored, it means I have already shown that at some point, so I'm not going to do that, but just to remind people what problems need to be solved to raw strings going really well. And the main thing that I think was holding us back is that to map this to ABNF, we actually have to have two prose vels. We have two productions that go beyond what a translator can currently translate from ABNF to a parser system. And this is the match raw dilim production in this ABNF and the short raw dilim. And one needs to be longer and the other one needs to be shorter than the start delimiter. So that's not so nice. I think Joe and I have both in our PEG implementations found ways to express this. So in ABNFTT, it looks like this. You just use the production raw dilim and put a predicate on it. So that's really easy. I don't remember how Joe solved it, but it's solvable. So let's say it's not quite the disaster that this slide makes you think. So yeah, this would be a significant usability gain. It's reasonably easy to implement, at least in two implementations we have been looking at. If you are using a traditional parser generator, you probably want to use a scanner parser setup anyway, and that will accommodate that easily too. So yeah, the question is, the feature looks useful. It seemed to help us in overcoming the f-string logjam, but there's this issue of using prose vels. So as an implementer, my point of view is that's not such a big problem. When we talked to Ori about that, then he said that's a deal breaker. You cannot do that. You have to stay within the mechanically translatable part of ABNF. So what I really would like people to ponder, and if you have already made up your mind, maybe say now, is how should we go on with this proposal of using raw strings? Is that even possible, or is the ABNF issue going to break the deal here?
So what if I may jump in here? What I can say as an implementer, I'll try to implement this. I haven't yet. This will be a third check.
Great. Anybody else? Thank you. So this will come up on the mailing list at some point. I hope after Joe and I have synchronized. And yeah, so people are now prepared and know what talking about raw strings actually means. So that's, I think, all I wanted to say. You're welcome to look at my slides offline, but we cannot really discuss them in 10 minutes. So I will move that to the mailing list.
Questions, comments? Just seeing that Ori is not in the meeting, Carsten, please reach out to him directly so that we get conclusion on that point.
Yeah, he was very adamant about that at IETF 123 when we discussed this in the room after the CBOR time had run out.
Paul?
Boy, I hate to, since Christian and I have never met, I hate to disagree with my working group co-chair here, but instead of reaching out to Ori, I would strongly prefer, again, because I've run into these discussions as I've been trying to be focused on the CDE discussions, please do it on the mailing list. One of the things that I think people forget in some working groups is that consensus does not mean the three people who have actually read this don't object. It means that the working group, everyone in the working group who is going to have an opinion, has had a chance to have an opinion and has not, has said, yes, this is fine to me. So, by the way, I'm fine with you, Carsten, with you and Joe doing offline, because the result of that will come to the mailing list. But given that I saw Ori's, I can't say that his hair was on fire because he doesn't have much hair, but his objection, Carson, I think you stated correctly, was extremely strong. That kind of thing absolutely winds into a consensus discussion. So please have that on the list.
Yeah, and to add to that, because the hair flaming discussion happened after the 123 session was over in a private conversation, that highlights what Paul's saying even more, that it really needs to be surfaced on the list.
Because again, at the, my job, at least at this point, is to determine consensus on discussions. And Carson, I apologize for having been your co-author on 8949 and then completely ignoring the discussions that happened afterwards. And so I am fire hosing them in now. The determination of consensus for this working group will be different than in other working groups. And I want to make sure that as we push out the next document and the next document and the next document, that no one says, gosh, I burnt out on the discussion early on, I ignored it, and then I missed the actual working group last call. I might have had some say in the consensus. I want these consensus calls to be causing greater inclusion than what we've had in the past.
I'll also point out that there's nothing wrong with reaching out to Ori to get him to bring him in to it, but the reach out
Correct.
should be, hey, we got this issue to discuss, let's take it to the mailing list, rather than
Right.
hashing out that way. Yeah.
Or in the face-to-face meeting, again, because that's minuted and such like that, but to make it clear that if somebody had, heard Ori's objection and said, yeah, I agree with that they see the conclusion and still can be part of the consensus on the conclusion.
Yeah, so I agree with everything you said in theory. In practice, the problem really is we need to understand whether we actually can use raw strings to solve those other problems that we have been talking about. So we have to make an early decision before we actually go to a consensus call on whether that's a reasonable avenue to proceed on.
I agree, but that the discussion of that ought to happen publicly rather than on a private conversation. That's all.
Yeah, again, I agree with that.
I started my video so you can see the look on my face. There's a workaround for Ori's issue, which is we do an extension to ABNF.
Correct.
That makes it mechanical. And I know we're not chartered for that work. I'm not saying that we should do it here. But there is a workaround. There's a technical.
We can arrange for that to be done one way or the other if that's what the consensus is to do. So have that discussion.
Yeah, the reason I wanted you to see my face is like I'm like 15% joking, but I'm like 85% serious.
So I might mention that I have a draft for other features of a modern ABNF, and that would fit in really well.
But this is also part of why we're pushing not to have much of this going on right now, because this really will distract from CDE, getting CDE done. So we need to balance that. We don't need to stop all of this, but let's make sure it doesn't interfere. Okay, we have 5 minutes to talk about the agenda for 124. So let's do that. I propose that the main thing on the agenda for 124 is resolve everything we can possibly resolve with CDE. And we should try to put that down into a few bullets of highlighted points that need to be discussed. We don't have to do that in the next 5 minutes, but we need to do that either now or on the list very soon. And we can allow time after most of that is done, like say we have an hour and a half. So perhaps the last half hour can be allocated to some discussion of EDN and PACT. Lawrence, comments?
In terms of what to do about CDE, it seems like, I mean, from my point of view, and what I'm proposing is that the big decision is which document are we going with, and there's pretty large implications for that selection, right?
Right, and that's so we can't have the discussion that we'll have at 124 now, but we can sort of queue it up and start having the discussion on the list. One of the things that should be discussed on the list now is, do we continue with CDE as it is, or do we do some version of your document, Lawrence, or do we do some combination of the two? That discussion needs to happen on the list now. And thank you for presenting the details today. So I suggest, because we're so short on time at this point, let's make the highest priority on the list right now to be setting up the agenda, a tentative agenda for the session at 124. And let's try to get that done in the next few days. And then let's get back to discussing CDE and Lawrence's document. Paul.
So I guess I get to disagree with both of my working group chairs in public. Great way to start. Sorry about that. I will say, and again, let me stop for a moment. I think this is premature because I have not, you've asked me to go through and look at consensus. I'm at this point not feeling that there is consensus to continue with the CDE document. There is certainly consensus that this is an important topic. So setting up the agenda now for, are we discussing the CDE document? Are we discussing Lawrence's document? Are we doing both? Seems a bit premature. If you all will give me to the end of the week to finish my evaluation and bring it, I think that will help the agenda discussion. By the way, I fully agree that the first hour should be on something around this topic. And I like the idea of the last half hour of bringing up the biggest points that might be blocking consensus on PACT and EDN.
Yeah, I think we're more in agreement than not.
Okay.
Basically what I was, but the problem is we need a tentative agenda very soon. So
I think we should call the first hour slot there determinism. Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Christian, since the three of us are now talking together for the first time here in public, does that work with you as well?
Yep, that's good. So I can put together something that that outlines that, and we can refine it later after we've got more information and more discussion on the list.
But I was asking Christian if that worked with him as well. I recognize the three-party discussion is a little bit odd to have the first time here in public.
That's why I resorted to nodding. Yes, that's
yeah. Okay, excellent, good. Then the three of us will go through, and the nice thing is that we can get a first agenda on well within the deadline, and we can keep iterating on the agenda as the working group discussion continues. And God forbid we can even work on the agenda during IETF week, since we are stuck on Friday.
Yep. Okay.
Yep.
Well, the chairs agree, and everybody's seen that, so
that's our job. Yep.
All right, and we are almost at the top of the hour. So does anybody have a last word before that clock ticks to the 0?
Thanks for Paul for chiming in.
Thank you, Karsten. And thank you, everybody, for coming.
Thanks, Paul.
Lawrence? Yeah. Okay. See you all at Montreal and on the list.
I'll be there remotely. See you.
Yep. Bye.